Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the monthly Empower Hour show. I am the holistic codependency coach from South Florida. My name is Debbie Sherrick. I'm the owner of InsideOutWellness.com, and I'm happy for you to join me today. Today's topic is one that's kind of a somber topic. It's not one that a lot of people like to talk about. People like to turn their heads about this and kind of stick their head in the sand because it's a little uncomfortable. But in honor of October being Domestic Violence Month, I wanted to do a Empower Hour show today talking about domestic violence. And so today I'm going to talk about domestic violence physical, if you're living in a situation or grew up in a situation of domestic violence. I'm also going to be talking about the effects of verbal and emotional abuse. And this is a topic today that is really dear to my heart. It's not something that I talk about a lot or share because a lot of people don't like to hear about, as I said, abuse and how growing up in an abusive family. But I am a survivor of domestic violence. I grew up in a domestic violent home. And then I also married an addict who was an abuser later in my life. And I'm going to share a little bit of my story later on. But this is also a topic, because it's so dear to my heart and I'm so passionate about it, that is so special to me to share my experience, strength, and hope with those who suffer from abuse of any kind. Because I know what it feels like. And I can say, if you're one of those who grew up in that or who is presently living in that, I can say to you that I know you and I know the feelings that you have. I know what it does to your spirit and your soul. I know what it does to your children, and that my heart is for you and I have empathy and compassion for you. However, I also my goal is to encourage women and men to come up and out of those situations. And if I can do it, you can do it. That, there is hope. There is so much help available today for us getting help and coming up out of that and getting healthy, getting some self-love and respect, self-respect. And, growing up in that is one of the reasons I do what I do today, because I have a lot of love and compassion to want to see people get strong, not live in those situations anymore, and attract healthy relationships, beginning with yourself first and then with others. So first of all, today I'm going to read you some statistics. I was doing a lot of notes over the last couple of days. I've really been trying to promote domestic violence this month. And, I have to share that one of the things that I've been really aggravated about this month that kind of really upset me was all the attention that's given to Breast Awareness Month. Not that upsets me, that there's attention given to Breast Awareness Month, but the lack of attention given to Domestic Violence Month. People, even football players, have been wearing pink to support breast awareness, which is awesome. The color for domestic violence and giving awareness to that is purple, and I haven't seen much of that around. And I noticed that when I did a lot of posts and a lot of meme posters with the hotline number on them and my website for contact for people who needed help. I did that all over social media this month, letting people know there is help and giving awareness and bringing it out there. And I noticed that when I would do something on domestic violence, there wasn't a lot of likes, there wasn't a lot of comments, because it's just people, there's a lot of reasons. I think people, one, they don't know what to do to help. Two, it's uncomfortable to think, well, yes, there's people out there being abused physically, emotionally, verbally, but, what can I do about it? And sometimes it's just a lot easier to raise money or funds for, something like the Heart Association or breast cancer, things like that. So I think there needs, and seeing this month, Delray Beach, I'm from Southeast Florida, and Delray this is their 15th year that did a walk run in downtown A1A by the ocean fundraiser for domestic violence that I was able to participate in. And we had over 800 people participating in that. So that was wonderful, to see that. And I know there were things going around, but I, for one, believe that there needs to be more awareness, more help, stronger laws, more teaching, getting it out there, breaking the silence about domestic violence, because it's rampant and it's such a secret for so many families behind closed doors that no one talks about, like I grew up. So let's start out, and I'm going to just to give you some awareness of some of the statistics that you may not know about domestic violence. Every 9 seconds, and these are statistics that are recent too. Some of them are research that have been done a few years ago, but a lot of the statistics are things that are in the last year or two. Every 9 seconds, a woman is abused in our country. There has been a 96% increase of calls to crisis lines and calls that are going in for women and men and children trying to find places to go or trying to find help, the domestic violence hotline. So in the last 3 years, that has increased by 96%. Now, all of these calls, I found out pretty much 100% of them get answered. There is a lot of volunteers for the hotlines. The problem is there's not enough shelters for people to go to. So these people are needing a place to go, and yet there isn't. The shelters always have a waiting list. They're always full. So we need more shelters. We need more places for mothers and children to be able to go. And they're the ones that mostly need, it seems that men can be more self-sufficient with domestic violence, they say, in taking care of themselves because they mostly have jobs. But women, a lot of times, are financially dependent on the abuser. We're going to talk about that in a little bit. And and have little children, and they're homemakers, and they have nowhere to go. And so I just find that so heartbreaking and sad when someone wants to leave their home and get out of the abuse, but they're calling a hotline, they're wanting help, and yet there's nowhere for them to go and escape to. 1 in 4 women and 1 in 7 men aged 18 and older in the United States has been the victim of physical violence by an intimate partner. Domestic violence, also known as intimate partner violence, because it's usually, with an intimate partner, can happen to anyone, regardless of gender, regardless of your race, regardless of your ethnicity, regardless of your sexual orientation, regardless of your income and other factors. The same as addiction, abuse is no respect of persons. We tend to think that abuse may come from lower income families, and that's not true. There's so much abuse that goes on in the community with wealthy people. One of the areas, when I started becoming a codependency coach and teaching codependency years ago and running groups, like 25 years ago, I was doing it in churches. And I was under the seeing how much abuse goes on in the church, and talk about keeping it a secret. It's really kept hidden in the churches, but there are many women that are abused under the name of God, where the husbands use religion to control the wife and brainwashing the woman to believe that it's a godly thing for her to be a doormat and submission. I had years ago also fallen, with my one husband who was an addict and abusive. His family was very active in a church, and he grew up in an abusive home, and he became an abuser. And we were active in church, and yet at home, behind closed doors, I was not being treated the way that he was acting like in the church and at home. So, don't be amazed that in a lot of churches, there is a lot of abuse going on. And I have a real compassion for that too. People involved in church, whether they be Christian, Jewish, ethnic, or whatever, Catholic, that to get in there and share the message and break the silence that it's not okay to pretend that everything's okay on the outside in the church and being involved like that and pretending to be holy when at home there are things going on. Women experience more than 4 million physical assaults because of their partners, and men are victims of nearly 3 million physical assaults. Women are more likely to be killed by an intimate partner than men. Women ages 20 to 34 are at greater risk of becoming victims of domestic physical violence. Domestic violence is most likely to occur between 6 p.m. in the evening and 6 a.m. in the morning. More than 60% of domestic violence incidents happen at home. According to the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, domestic violence is the third leading cause of homelessness among families today. I found that just profound, that the third leading cause, other than losing a job, the third leading cause of homelessness is because of domestic violence, that the person has to leave the home and has chosen to be homeless rather than live in a home of domestic violence. Survivors of domestic violence face high rates of depression, sleep disturbances, anxiety, flashbacks, and other emotional disorders and distress. Now, I find that a lot in the work that I do and working with codependents, even if they grew up, in a domestic violence or a really abusive, emotionally, verbally, physically abusive home, that they tend to suffer more physically, or depression, anxiety, sleep disturbances. Domestic violence also contributes to poor health for many survivors. For example, chronic conditions like heart disease and gastrointestinal disorders can become more serious due to domestic violence. Thyroid issues. As a holistic codependency coach, I work with alternative medicine, and I'm an herbalist, and I work physically, emotionally, and spiritually with the codependent, not just working on the emotional issues, because I find that, I do believe in being a holistic wellness coach. I know about the mind-body connection, and I believe that the subconscious mind and the body are one. Feelings buried alive never die, and they will show up physically in the body. And so one of the common things with growing up in a home like this, or being in a situation like this, is gastrointestinal disorders. And when we think about our energy centers and we think about the chakra centers, and I love relating chakra energy centers to codependency, to recovery. And the lower chakras being our family of origin and our relationship centers and things, our emotions and feelings of the past. And generally they live down there. We live down in those emotions, reacting to our belief systems from when we're children, continuing to reenact that belief system in our life today, having cords of attachment to people who hurt us and abused us from the past, and losing our empowerment. And to me, the goal is to raise up into higher consciousness living, where we can work through those things, change our belief system, work through forgiveness, be able to love in a healthy way again, be able to create interdependent relationships instead of codependent relationships, or independent relationships where we put walls around us, and being able to speak our truth. Now, one of the things, as I was bringing up gastrointestinal disorders, is I find that very common in people in recovery and codependency, because we have trouble, we swallow our words, we stuff everything down into that digestive system, down into those lower chakras, into the colon intestinal area and our stomach. So we continue have swallowed our truth. continue to swallow our words, not being able to set boundaries and speak up for ourselves, not being able to speak up and say, this is what I need, and not have needs met in a relationship because they fear speaking up for that. Growing up maybe in a family where they weren't allowed to share their feelings, share their truth, or talk. And, and growing up in a dysfunctional home, everything's pretty much a secret. So I find that there are a lot of that. And as we work on that holistically and work on healing at a physical level and an emotional level, that those begin to heal. Also, the anxiety, because in our solar plexus center, which is our empowerment center, this is where our self-esteem and self-confidence is. And this is where we feel fear. If you think about it, when you have anxiety or you're feeling fear about something, don't you feel it right here? Your body tenses up and you feel it in your solar plexus area, right here in the upper stomach. And so, of course, if you've grown up in a domestic violent home or you're living in an abusive home, there's a lot of fear. And so they tend to have a lot of anxiety, and not dealing with the anxiety and realizing that there's fear. We're so prone in America when we have disorders like stomach and anxiety and depression and sleep disorders, that we aren't taught in America, Western medicine, to connect the emotional component, to connect our belief system to the body, when they're not taught mind-body connection. So people tend to run to the doctor to get a pill. So one of my favorite things to do is to work with people, getting them off the Xanax and the antidepressants and the Nexium for their stomach and all the things, and treating symptom and putting very healthy things in the body to help the body heal from the good nutrition, and then working on the emotional where they don't have to be on the medications. So if you are having some of those things, think about, the heart condition. When it mentioned a lot of survivors of domestic violence have a lot of heart disease, and our heart is where we feel pain. Our heart is where we hold resentment. Our heart is where we have unforgiveness. And this is our love center. If we weren't loved properly, or we are hurting because of lack of love, and we're holding on to that unforgiveness and resentment in our heart area, it can show up physically, people. There really is a mind-body connection. So let's go on with the rest of our statistics. Among women brought to emergency rooms due to domestic violence, most were socially isolated and had fewer social and financial resources than other women not injured because of domestic violence. So women that were brought into emergency room from domestic violence, the statistics show that they had fewer social resources, which we know that to be true if you grew up in that or you are in that one of the things that the abuser does is, keep you from having social contacts, keep you from having friends, keep you from being with your family because they don't want to be found out, and they want to keep you, under their thumb and have that control. So they, you don't have a lot of social contact. You're like, as we say, taken hostage. And also, mostly in a domestic violence home, the abuser has total financial control over the money. So, I found that that doesn't surprise me, that they don't have connections, they don't have money when they're brought in. Without help, girls who witness domestic violence are more vulnerable to abuse as teens and adults. So if you're a woman and a girl, you grew up in a domestic violence home, you're more vulnerable to attract an abuser, which I can totally vouch for that, because we grew up in it and it's part of our belief system, and it's just familiar to us on how to be treated. Without help, boys who witness domestic violence are far more likely to become abusers of their partners and or children as adults, thus continuing the cycle of violence in the next generation. Domestic violence costs more than $37 billion a year in law enforcement, involvement, legal work, medical and mental health treatment, and lost productivity at companies. And, that's another thing that I'm a big advocate about, is the laws of domestic violence, because I know here in Florida, and I'm really not familiar with a lot of other states. I'm originally from Indiana, and I do believe it's a little stronger there, reinforced there. But in Florida, really, a restraining order doesn't mean anything. I mean, you have it and you have the paperwork, but for that to be reinforced, or for that restraining order to keep the abuser from finding you or getting in contact with you, because if they feel like they're losing control, they're going to up the ante. I find that, a lot of women who were killed because of domestic violence in Florida or severely injured had restraining orders. So there needs to be stronger laws with domestic violence. I believe there needs to be stronger programs for those who are fined and arrested for domestic violence. There needs to be stronger rehabilitation programs, not just sent to an anger management class for 6 to 12 weeks, but that there needs to be really strong consequences for domestic violence and protecting the person in the home, and of course, especially the children. Most domestic violence incidents are never reported, and I believe that. I want to talk for a minute too about the statistics of children in domestic violent homes. Being a survivor of domestic violence in my home, and I have 4 children myself and 5 grandchildren, another one on the way. I love children. I just absolutely love them. And to me, my motto is always children first. You must protect the child no matter what. You have a responsibility, a moral responsibility and a legal responsibility, because children are true little victims. They are truly powerless. And so if you, I saw on one of the Addicts Moms Facebook group last night, I saw where a woman posted that she had signs that, and saw that her children who were addicts, her daughter and husband who were addicts, were abusing, or were using in the home in front of the grandchildren, the little grandchildren. And she called DCF on them. And she felt a lot of guilt about it. They came and they did take the children, and the daughter-in-law's mother has the children. And she needed support and confirmation that she did the right thing. She had a guilt about turning her children in. And everyone was so very supportive to her about, oh my gosh, of course you did the right thing. Always protect the children. It's just part of the consequence of, using and being an addict. And sometimes we still try to protect as codependents and enable and rescue, and we don't want our children who are addicts to have consequences. And of course, that's a whole nother Empower Hour, talking about if we're a mother of addicts. So let's talk about the statistics of children in domestic violence homes. Every year, more than 3 million children witness domestic violence in their homes. Children who live in homes where there is domestic violence also suffer abuse or neglect at high rates, between 40 and 65%. A 2007 Michigan study found that children exposed to domestic violence at home are more likely to have health problems, including becoming sick more often, having frequent headaches, tummy aches, and being tired and lethargic. And they tend to be children who isolate more and don't have good social skills. And again, there goes that mind-body connection, that when the spirit and the soul, your emotional being is witnessing things and being hurt, it will show up. The body also suffers also. And so, even little children tend to be more sick and have more gastrointestinal disorders when they are brought up in a domestic violence home and they witness that. A 2003 study found that children are more likely to intervene when they witness severe violence against a parent, which can place a child at great risk for injury or even death. And I know this to be true. In the home that I grew up in, I was the oldest of 4 children. I had 2 other sisters, and I had 1 brother. And my brother, being the male of the family, would constantly intervene when there was domestic violence, when there was abuse going on, to try to protect our mother. And he would get hurt sometimes because he would really, I mean, he'd be this little bitty kid, but he would try to protect and he would intervene. And so I believe that. I believe that a lot of times kids get hurt because they want to protect the parent. They want to jump in, which is so sad. A study in 1999 found that children who grew up in domestic violent homes are more apt to become codependent and or substance abuse users and abusers themselves. I think that's kind of a no-brainer if you grow up in a home like that. They also suffer from deep shame, being able to trust in relationships, and suffer from rejection and abandonment fears. They also are more apt to be loyal in relationships as adults to those who treat them poorly or abuse also, which is part of that codependency. When you grow up in a home that you see the parent is continuing to stay, no matter how much the abuse escalates or how much abuse, that the parent is loyal no matter what, then we grow up and tend to be loyal in relationships that do not serve us and that aren't healthy for us, or our needs aren't being met. And we continue to stay and stay and stay because that's what was mirrored to us as children growing up. I would like to see more education for children in the schools. It's very hard. I've tried, and I know a lot of domestic violence shelters try. Those are involved with having a voice for domestic violence, try to get into the schools. And I think that's something that we need to all rally around. There needs to be more education. People brought in to teach these children that if daddy's beating up mommy or mommy's beating up dad, or there's violence in the home, but we need to educate these children that it's not okay and that they need to break the silence and they need to feel safe to do that, that there needs to be advocates and counselors and people that they can go and share, bless their hearts, what's going on in their home, because you grow up thinking that your home is normal, that that's just the way it is, and you go to school and you don't talk about it, you don't talk to anybody about it, it's a secret because you're ashamed of it. Something inside you knows it's wrong, but you don't talk about it. And so getting education in the schools, to me, should be a top priority, to educate these kids while they're little, and also educating, which is a real desire of mine, is to get in and educate young girls in their teens and adolescent, in junior high, in high school, and teaching them about how to be treated, teaching them self-worth and self-esteem courses and classes, and also teaching them red flags in a relationship, what's okay and what's not okay. Teaching them how it's okay to be treated and speak up for your needs, teaching them how to set boundaries in relationship, and to teach them that we teach people how to treat us. So they have that power, letting them know you have the power to pick your relationships. You have the power to teach others when you start dating and having boyfriends. You have the power, giving them the knowledge and teaching them how to teach others to treat them by the way that they love and respect themselves. So I think that's something that really needs to be addressed, is getting education at an early age about domestic violence. So I'm going to share for just a little bit about my home life in my life, just to share with you where I've come from. As I said, I like to share that because to show you and to let you know that you can come up and out of situations and how to do that. And before I'm going to share that, and then I'm going to get into why people stay in violent relationships. So just in a short synopsis, I do on my website, I do have a pretty lengthy where I tell my story of growing up and up until like now. I'll do that at the end of the show. But a short synopsis about domestic violence and growing up in it is that I grew up in a very small farm town in Indiana, way out in rural route, and I was the oldest of 4 children. My parents were married at a very young age, 16 and 18 years old, because I was coming along. And my father, my father was an alcoholic and an abuser. And I don't remember my dad not being an alcoholic. I don't remember what age that escalated or when, but I can remember my very first experience of domestic violence. I was about 4.5 years old, 4.5, 5 years old, and we were way in, rural route, no neighbors around, and it was in the evening, and I was sitting behind the couch and I was playing jacks, and on the floor. And my mother was sitting in a rocking chair, nursing either my baby brother, probably my baby brother at the time, the third one. And my father came in and he wanted the keys. He wanted to leave. I remember that. And my mother, being a good codependent, I'm sure had hidden the keys to keep him from leaving. And that was the dance. That was the pattern that they did. That my father would start drinking at home, but he would leave and go drinking and stay out at bars, and also ran around. So he wasn't someone who stayed home. So when I can remember my mother not wanting to give him the keys. And I remember watching my dad walk over and grab my mother by the hair to pull her up out of the rocking chair because he wanted to he was escalating his violence to get what he wanted, to have control. And at that time, I can remember, and this is where one of my belief systems occurred as a child, is I can remember it's primarily the main feeling is fear. You walk around in fear on eggshells all the time, waiting for the other shoe to drop, not knowing what's going to happen. There's just no consistency. And so I can remember feeling that feeling of fear. And at that time, at that event, I made a decision that I needed to do something. And so I threw those jacks out into the floor to distract my father. And it worked. Obviously, it distracted him. I don't remember, mother getting up and giving him the keys. I do remember him leaving. And I remember me going over as a little girl to my mom and the baby and soothing them and taking care of them and feeling protective of them, that I wanted to caretake them and protect them. And I believe that was just the beginning of the belief system that I created in being a hero child, the oldest in the family, that I could caretake, I could rescue, I could take care of my mother and my siblings, that I could manipulate the abuser in distracting him to protect my family. And I took on that role as a little girl pretty my whole childhood in doing that. So that's an example of how we create belief systems as children. And of course, I carried that on until I got into some healing and recovery of every relationship I picked was abuser or someone unavailable emotionally, someone who needed fixed and rescued, someone who was verbally abusive, so that I could control and caretake and fix. And so, another belief system that I got growing up was no matter what, you're trapped and you can't leave. You always stay. There is no help. There is no hope. And I got that message. It wasn't verbally spoken in my home, but I got that message because of what was shown to me. Now, in growing up, we're talking, tell my age, we're talking about 50 some years ago, in growing up in that home and in that little rural town, there was no help. There was no AA meetings close by. There was no Al-Anon close by. There was no CODA meetings in the area at all. And so, back then also, in the 50s and early 60s, people just didn't divorce. They pretty much stayed. You know, the divorce rate was low, and no matter what, you just stayed. Women stayed at home and worked and took care of the children, and the men were the providers. And so it was really kept a secret in our home. There were some family members who knew, but my point is that even when I would run upstairs at times when there was violence going on and I would call the police in the little town we grew in, the police knew my father. And, you know, they would slap his hand and tell him to stop drinking and to behave. And so there wasn't consequence. I don't remember my dad ever going to jail because of domestic violence when I grew up. So I can imagine, you know, the feeling and knowing that my mother felt as a young mother with 4 kids, feeling so trapped and hopeless, and that there was no help. And even when the times that we would leave, when we would leave and go to my aunt's house, to a relative's home, you know, my father would come and manipulate and cry, and as they do, and talk us into coming back. And I can remember that back and forth. So, you know, again, I didn't have any barometer in relationships when I grew up that it's okay to leave, you know, that you need to stay because you've made this commitment. You need to stay loyal to this commitment to take care of myself. So that was just a couple of the belief systems that I learned that I had to change in my recovery and growing up. But the one thing that I wanted to say about growing up in a domestic as a child is that the effect that it has on the child is horrendous. The fear as a little child, and you know, kids need to feel safe and secure in their home from mommy and daddy. They are their hero. They're the person they depend on to take care of them for their security and for their safety. And nothing destroys that more than domestic violence in the home. So, you know, sometimes I find when working with codependents from, you know, that are in a domestic violent home, they're so caught up in their disease of codependency and focusing on the addict or the abuser and the dance that they do of how it's affecting their children. And so I love educating them that you are really abusing your children by staying in this situation, and your children are going to have horrendous outcomes and side effects from in life and as children, in growing up and seeing this, that as a mother, you must take care of your children. A lot of times, young women in domestic violence relationships do not leave, they get pregnant. There's a high call-in when women get pregnant because of that nurturing effect of children, and they have a baby and they want to protect their baby. They haven't been able to maybe really protect their self, but they want to protect their child. So they will call for help or get into a shelter or get into recovery because of the child. So if you are someone who has children and you're living in this situation, please think of your children and do it for your children, if not yourself, because the fear and the anxiety and the sadness and the depression that goes on in a child's life when they are afraid, they are so afraid in their home that somebody's going to get hurt, they don't have the tools to understand or to process through those feelings of anger and depression, and they will act out in many different ways. So let's go on now to in talking about something that you hear in the public a lot is, well, why doesn't she just leave? It's a commonly heard question when it comes to violent relationships is, well, why doesn't the victim just leave? Why would somebody live in that and put up with that? It seems obvious enough. If your partner is abusive, you know, why would you stay? To people who haven't grown up in that or aren't living in that, it's a pretty logical question. However, it's more complicated for the survivor to simply walk out of the house. And so I'm going to talk about why people stay in domestic violence, just to kind of give you some education on that. If you ask yourself that question, maybe you have a friend or someone you know that is living in this. And it's just frustrating that you can't understand why she won't leave or why he won't leave and get out of that situation. And so we need to step back and look at, one, their belief system that they have, their own reality, and that they're operating out of their own level of awareness and where they're at. So our job is to really educate them, build their esteem, help them to learn that they have an answer and that they don't have to live like this. There is help out there. But I find even when they know that there's help, excuse me, that the best thing to do that works is to help them work on their past and their childhood issues, learn to love themselves and take care and respect themselves, and doing that in many so when they do come to love and respect themselves, they're able to set boundaries. Excuse me. I forgot to get water today. So it's definitely a common assumption that you get from the public. The most important thing to know is that leaving is the most dangerous time for a woman, is when she's leaving. Because if it's the time when really she's most likely to be killed or really, really hurt. Because if the abuser finds out that she's leaving, we have to remember that abuse is about power and control. The abuser wants power and control. And even though in our denial, and we see them very powerful and very controlling, they're really very weak, hurting, insecure people. But that is the most dangerous time, is when a person is leaving. That's why there needs to be so much support and advocates around them, and knowing where she's going, and people there helping her and supporting her and encouraging her. Oftentimes abuse can escalate after a survivor leaves, because abusive relationships are based on the cycle. There are cycles of abuse, of power and control. When an abuser feels he has lost control over his victim, he may use violence as a way to coerce his partner to return, or as a form of retaliation for leaving. I have seen that in situations where someone tries to leave and then they end up going back because maybe the abuser has talked them and manipulated them into coming back, promised to get help. Maybe, however, we know, the flow and how that goes. And so we believe the words. We believe that they mean it. Through the crocodile tears, I can remember my dad, just crying all the time. And, it's funny when I look back about being the hero child and the caretaker of my mother. I can remember when we would go to my aunt's house to escape and be there for a few days or a week, and my dad would call to see if he could come talk to my mom, and I can remember saying, please don't, because we didn't want him to go back. And so she would agree to go in front of the house if my dad would pull up in the car, and go out to the car and sit in the car where she felt safe to talk to him. And I can remember insisting on going with her as a child, and her letting me, and she didn't know any better, and that she should have let me be in that situation. But she was so codependent and had no recovery at all, and probably felt safe. She allowed me to be the surrogate parent to her. And so here I was as a little girl, maybe 6, 8, 10, I can remember doing it many times, sitting in the back seat, listening and watching my dad cry with his crocodile tears, promising to go to AA, promising to go to a therapist, promising to get help, promising, telling her how much he loved her and the children, he didn't want to lose his family. And my mom, being the good codependent, loving, and believing the lies and believing, would go back. And here I was as a child doing that, being the caretaker, being the rescuer to my mother, protecting my mother at a early age, or thinking I was. So, no wonder I grew up with that role as an adult in seeking out people who needed to be fixed and taken care of. So, don't let your children, don't include them in letting them be the surrogate parent to you, or it's very damaging to them. Or we call that in therapy, we call that emotional incest, that it is very damaging emotionally to the child to bring them into situations that is not fit for a child, things that they didn't need to hear. But when we talk about coercing, the abuser is very good about coercing. And that's why there needs to be strong boundaries followed through and a contract. And we need to see action before you do anything of reconciliation. A period of time, a long period of time of being apart where both are in recovery, getting help, and a lot of accountability, working on the issues because they run very deep, and not just believing what someone says. So another factor of why doesn't she just leave is the biggest factor, as I said before, is fear, a lot of fear. And a lot of women are threatened by their partner who'll say, if you leave me, this will happen. I can remember my dad saying to my mother, where are you going to go? How are you going to raise, you've been married since you were 16. How are you going to raise 4 children on your own? You'll never make it. You'll end up living on the streets. Where are you going to go? Who's going to take care of you? Who's going to pay your bills? Because she was a homemaker taking care of, she was a mom. And so a fear, a lot of women are threatened by their partner. If you leave me, I'll kill you. If you ever talk to anyone about what's happening, I'll kill you. They're very intense threats. An abusive partner may also threaten to harm the children, a survivor's extended family, or pets if the woman leaves. That's why it's important for a woman to work with an advocate so they can leave in the safest possible way. Must have support and, have a plan. We talk about having a plan for people leaving a domestic violence situation, or when you're leaving a controller, you need to have a plan, because there will be backlash and they will up the ante because they're losing control. And you need to feel safe and protected in doing that. Another reason why a survivor may stay in an abusive relationship is because they find themselves financially dependent on the abuser. Survivors may not have control of their own money or even have a credit card. Without any financial resources, it may seem impossible to leave. I can totally relate to that. My second husband, who was the abuser and the addict, had total, I was at home with 4 children. I was like my mother. I was a mom and taking care of the home. And he was the financial provider, and he controlled that. He had total control over the money, the checkbook. I was on a real tight budget of what I could spend, and I had to show receipts, and just a lot of control, and ask permission if I wanted to buy something. And so I felt so trapped, because how am I going to leave? How am I going to take care of myself again? That financial threat. And he would give the threat that, don't think if you leave that you'll ever get anything. I'll quit my job. I'll do this, so it's a way of control. So that's another reason why women stay, is that there's control over financial. And I want to say too, one of the things that I encourage, and I've taught my 3 daughters, is to have your own, work. Don't be totally financially dependent on your spouse as females. Have your own job, have your own work, have your own income, where it helps with your security and your safety, to know that you are totally 100% dependent on that person to take care of you, and that you can't go out there in life. However, I did get to the place where I said, I don't care if I have to live in a shack. I don't care. I'm not living like this anymore. I'm done. And that was the beginning of my turn and growing. However, I had been sneaking and going to a codependent coach and therapist to help me with the abuse and to set boundaries and to do these things. I was having support. I was starting to feel stronger. I was starting to see that I was teaching him how to treat me, that I was volunteering by staying in the relationship. I started to see how I couldn't change him. I could only change me. And I started getting a vision of what my life could look like, and that I didn't feel trapped, and I didn't have to be loyal to a situation that was harming me and harming my children. And so I started getting stronger, and then I had a lot of support in order to make that decision to get the restraining order, to file for the divorce, and to step out in faith. And I couldn't have done it without God. It's to step out in faith to start taking control back of my life. And it was one of the best decisions that I ever did. Because sometimes when we start getting healthy and setting boundaries, sometimes the partner will start shifting and changing, and it will cause them maybe to get help also. However, sometimes they don't. And so we get stronger with our boundaries and seeing that we're not going to be treated like this anymore. We don't want to be. And we get stronger. And the relationship, we realize that this does not fit me anymore. I am not energetically connected to this person anymore. And this is not how I want to live. And that there's things better for me, and that God has a plan for me, a plan for good and not for evil. And I want to say this too, in thinking about that and stepping out in faith with my 4 children, I went back to school, that there was, and I live by faith every week, that there was never a time that God did not meet our needs. And I've watched this through the years with other single mothers with children who've left situations. I think there just is a special blessing and anointing upon mothers, single mothers with children, that God just seems to step in and just take care and give them favor and meet every one of their needs financially. It might be the 11th hour, but he does step in and do that. You know, he is so faithful with that. And I'm so grateful for his faithfulness. The other thing too about why a woman doesn't leave is many people also don't think about how the survivor believes that she really loves this person in spite of the abuse. I loved my abuser with all my heart. I didn't like the abuse. I didn't like the addiction, but I loved the abuser. And so the survivors, in doing that, they believe, because of the love, that the abuser is going to change. They believe the lies for a long time. They believe, they want to believe, and yet they get into denial because there's no show, there's no action taken that they are changing. The promises are continually broken, but they stay sometimes because they really love the person. This is where it may be frustrating for friends and relatives to help their loved ones who is with an abusive partner. Those who haven't experienced violence may not be able to understand how strong the control is that the abuser has over the victim. You have no idea. I look back, I can't even believe that was me. It was the same person, but I remember the power of control that that abuser had over me. I remember my father and how much he had over my mother. And until you grow and make the changes in your life, it begins with us, not them, with us. And changing and growing stronger and getting help, can you start cutting away at that control and not being controlled like that anymore. Unfortunately, it must be the survivor's choice to leave. So providing her with resources for help, such as shelters, advocacy groups, information about orders of protection, and offering phone numbers and all. And I'm going to give some phone numbers at the end of places that you can reach out to call and to get help. And so I'm also going to give you information how to contact me if you're interested in doing some private coaching to help with a domestic violence situation. And as I said, it may not be physical. It may be verbal and abusive, which is just as damaging. So I'm going to go into that now for a few minutes about emotional and verbal abuse. Because sometimes people will say, well, thank God, yes, he or she is verbally, very verbally abusive, very emotionally abusive, playing a lot of games. But thank God they're not physically abusive, so I can tolerate that. Well, I'm going to tell you, physical and emotional and verbal abuse can be just as damaging, if not more, because it's so brainwashing and it really kills the spirit of the person. So, as a codependency coach of my own, involved with working with addicts or those in domestic violence, codependent, dysfunctional families, I know all too well what it feels like to be in a relationship or a situation like that deteriorates the spirit because of emotional and verbal abuse. But there are ways to break the cycle and take your power back and take responsibility for yourself. And it is about taking responsibility and not playing victim anymore and blaming, look what they're doing to me, but taking care of yourself and asking yourself why you're allowing yourself to be treated that way and speaking up for yourself, to change the behavior. Emotional abuse can take on many forms, and some people don't realize the many ways of emotional abuse. So I'm going to share with you and name some things that are, when these things are repetitive in the home, in the relationship, if these things are repetitive, going on constantly, these are many forms of emotional abuse, such as blaming, belittling, name calling, ignoring, acting cruel, isolating and withholding love, refusing to be available, sarcasm, ordering around, being hypercritical, lying, interrogating the other person. I can remember that being interrogated. Where'd you go? Who were you with? What'd you wear? Who'd you see? Manipulation, rejecting and withholding love, control of what you wear, where you go, and who you see, passive aggressive behavior, scaring another person, which can lead to ultimately winning control over them. Emotional abuse is a form of brainwashing and can be very damaging to the victim. It may be so familiar to the person who's abusing that it's normal for them to be abusive, even if they've been allowed to do so. An example of abuse that subtly builds over time could be telling a spouse maybe that they're ugly, they're fat, they're no good, they're useless, just, cussing them, name calling, tearing them down repeatedly. Emotional abuse slowly eats away at a victim's self-confidence until they feel they can no longer trust not only anyone else, but they can't even trust themselves, as they lose their sense of self-worth and self-esteem. It can sometimes be outwardly in a person's behavior, or it can be something completely hidden. So emotional abuse is not always easy to spot by the eyes of the outsider. As I said, my addict husband was a charming gentleman in public, so no one knew what was going on behind closed doors. And in that, saying how it does eat away at self-confidence and self-abuse. I remember when I got out of that relationship and was filing for divorce, that at that time, I didn't even feel like I could flip hamburgers at McDonald's. I mean, my esteem and my worth was so low. I just, because of the corroding in the years of telling me that I couldn't do anything, that telling me I wouldn't make it on my own, and brainwashing me to believe that I had to, really go through some deep recovery and healing to get my self-esteem and self-confidence back, to believe that I could do whatever I'm called to do and whatever I want to do and whatever my passion and my desires are, and so can you. With verbal abuse, a person may be continually yelled at or humiliated when abused. They may be told they will be hurt or killed. They're constantly living in fear for their life and learn to walk on eggshells and be a people pleaser to feel safe and gain some sense of control. That's an awful way to feel too when you're walking on eggshells all the time. They may be teased or have confusing inconsistency in their life, like when an alcoholic parent or spouse comes home happy one night and angry the next. There's no consistency. This is how my home was in growing up. I never knew when the other shoe was going to drop. One thing I have found is that those involved with this kind of behavior also don't have healthy emotional personal boundaries. If your feelings and needs were neglected growing up and were abused as a child, you may feel that this is normal and it's just part of what you have to put up with. You may have trouble knowing when your boundaries are being disrespected because you don't know what boundaries are. You also, because of your low self-worth, may not feel you are entitled to assert your rights to be treated with respect. You may have the impulse to do something when your person is being abusive in order to take care of them emotionally, to rescue them, and that's the dance we do with the abuser. You may allow their problems and responsibility to become yours, and you're constantly trying to rescue, fix, and change it. It's a lot of wasted energy. You may also feel that you are totally powerless with how your abuser speaks to you and treats you. A wonderful therapist told me many years ago, she said, Debbie, when it comes to abuse, unless you're walking down the street and pulled in the bushes one day and beat up and abused, you're a victim. But when you're in a relationship, in the home or in a relationship that you're abused, there are no victims, there's only volunteers. And that there's a reason you're in this, because you've taught him that it's okay to treat you like this. And, that was like a slap in the face to me. It was such a huge wake-up call for me of why was I allowing this? And again, this became my journey of getting back into looking at my belief system from childhood and changing how I felt about me. So I was attracting people who loved me the way I love myself. And, today I want to say this too, that marriage was a gift. Unfortunately, that husband stayed in his addiction years after we divorced, and he ended up overdosing and dying about 15 years ago. But I'm very grateful to him today because he was my greatest messenger and my gift to teach me about myself and to help me grow and get healthier. And he taught me how to say no. He taught me how to set boundaries. He taught me how to take care of myself. He taught me that I don't have to be treated this way. He taught me that I can change my belief system. So I am thankful and grateful for him today for choosing to be my teacher, that he was a gift to me. It changed my life because I didn't think that I had any choice. One thing we have to realize too is that hurting people hurt people, and that we take it personally, that, it's something about us. And you ever heard that joke, a codependent joke, what kind of insurance do codependents buy? My fault. Because we think, well, a lot of abusers, if they're abused or they're treated abusively, they think it's their fault. They did something wrong, or they shouldn't have done this, or they shouldn't have said this, or they're not pretty enough, or they're not doing this enough. And so we try to control the abuser by making changes to appease them and to please them. And so we have to remember that they are sick and they are hurting and they have their own set of issues and things that they need to work on, and our responsibility is to take care of ourselves. You cannot continue to use that as an excuse. They're sick. You don't know how they grew up and what they had to put up with in their childhood, and they're hurting. That can't be an excuse anymore, because that's us thinking that we're going to caretake and rescue them and take care of them, and that we're their heroes, we're their saviors. In the meantime, allowing ourselves to be treated like this. If you're allowing this behavior of abuse, then your boundaries are weak. So, learning, there's just so much in the learning and coming up out of that. And so I just want to say that, because our time and we need to close, that I remember when I started setting boundaries, and I remember getting healthier and how scared to death I was. But I acted in spite of the fear. A lot of it was acting as if, excuse me, because I was scared, but I knew that this was the healthy way to act. So I had the support of those around me in my group and my therapist to be able to step out and start doing healthy things. But I remember how scared I was. And I remember how he used his rage and anger to control me, but I could not have done it without my support. So please don't, do this and make the decision to do this today. And I hope I've given you a lot of things to think about. And I hope mostly I've given you courage and inspiration that you can do this. But I made it very clear of what I would allow, what I wouldn't allow anymore. And so as I did that, each time I did that, I felt more and more empowered. And of course, if you're in a situation where you're going to set boundaries and do that, and you're going to be physically abused, then that's when we need to leave the situation. So if you're suffering abuse, know that you can stop the madness and break the silence. There is help out there. You don't have to suffer alone. Learning to detach and love and set boundaries, get your power back. Make up your mind. I'm not going to do this anymore. I've had enough. You're not trapped. You do deserve love and respect. Everyone deserves to be treated respectfully and loved. And so do your children. So please reach out and start the healing process. You won't regret it. I wanted to, in closing, I want to give you the hotlines, numbers to call. The National Domestic Hotline is 1-800-799-7233. You can also go to www.thehotline.org. There's also Friends of Battered Women and Their Children, 1-800-603-HELP, 1-800-603-HELP. And then the Child Abuse Hotline is 1-800-252-2873. And incidentally, you know, this show is recorded, so you can go back if you miss these numbers and listen again and listen to the numbers. It goes straight to a YouTube channel, so you can continually go back. You can watch it later. You can share it with a friend who might need to hear it. I want to give my information too, as a locally, if you are locally in South Florida, I do personal, one-on-one coaching in my studio. I also run a support group. If you are not local, I do a lot of Skype coaching one-on-one globally, all across the place. So you are able to get personal one-on-one coaching also that way. Thank goodness for technology, right? That we're able to do that. And you can send me an email also at Debbie@insideoutwellnesscoach.com. That's Debbie@insideoutwellnesscoach.com is my email and my website. And I also have a contact form on my website. And the website is www.insideoutwellnesscoach.com. So thank you for joining today on talking about domestic violence. I realize, it's not a happy topic to talk about, but I'm so happy to be able to share with you some insight. And this is a topic we really could talk a long time about, but I hope I gave you some valuable information and encouragement today and watching the Empower Hour show. So thanks again for joining in. Have a great rest of the day. Bye-bye.